The particular events that are subject of this history occurred in 1940 in Iran. The general opinion was that they were misplaced there since they deviate somewhat from the ordinary. At first sight, indeed, Orion is an ordinary town, nothing more than a French prefecture on the coast of Algeria. It has to be said that the town itself is ugly. Its appearance is calm, and it takes some time to appreciate what makes it different from so many other trading ports all over the world. How can one convey, for example, the idea of a town without pigeons, without trees or gardens, where you hear no beating of wings or rustling of leaves? In short, a neutral place. In charge of seasons can only be detected in the sky. Spring declares itself solely in the quantity of the air, or so the little baskets of flowers and the street sellers bring from the suburbs. This is a spring that is solid in the marketplace. In summer, the sun burns the dried out houses and cover the walls with gray powder. At such times, you can no longer live except behind closed shutters. In autumn, on the contrary, there's a large amount of mud. Fine weather arrives only in winter. The convenient way of getting to know the town is to find out how people work there, how they love and how they die. In our little town, perhaps because of the climate, all things are done together, with the same frenzied and abstract air. That is to say that people are bored and that they make an effort to adapt certain habits. Our fellow citizens work a good deal, but always in order to make money. They are especially interested in trade, and first of all, as they say, they are engaged in doing business. Naturally, they also enjoy the simple pleasures. They love women, the cinema, and sea bathing. But they very sensibly keep their activities for Saturday evenings and Sunday, while trying on the other days of the week to earn a lot of money. In the evening, when they leave their offices and gather at the set time in cafes, they walk along the same boulevard, or else they come out of the balconies. The desire of the youngest among them are short and violent, while the lives of their elders are limited to clubs and players and ballets, dinners of friendly association, or groups where they have heavily on the turn of a card. You will say, no doubt, that this is not particular to our town, and that when it comes down to it, people today are like that. Of course, there is nothing more normal nowadays than to see people working from morning to evening. They choose to waste their time they have left for living at cards in cafes or in elder chatter. But there's our towns and countries where people do occasionally have an aching to do something else. On a whole, it does not change their lives, but they did have an inking, and that is positive in itself. Iran, on the other hand, appears to be a town without inking, that is to say, the entire modern town. As a result, it is not necessary to describe in details how people here love one another. Men and women neither consume each other rapidly in what is called the act of love, or else enter into a long-lasting shared routine. Often there is no middle between the two extremes. That too is original. In Iran, as elsewhere, for want of time and thought, people have to love one another without knowing it. Sometimes more distinctive about our town is how difficult it can be to die there. Difficult is not actually the right word. It is more a question of discomfort. It is never pleasant being ill, But there are towns and countries which support you in sickness, and where one can, as it gets, where lets oneself go. A sick person needs tenderness. He quietly, naturally likes to lean on something. But in Iran, the extreme climate and the amount of business going on, the insignificance of the surrounding and the speed with which night falls, and the quality pleasure of demand good health, a sick person is very lonely here. So just think of one who is about to die, trapped behind hundreds of walls sizzling in heat, while at the same time there are also people on the telephone or in the cafes talking of drafts, of bills, of landing, of discounts. You will understand what could be disagreeable about death, even a modern one, when it happens in such a dry place. Even so, the mirage information may give a sufficient idea of our town. In any event, one should not exaggerate. It is important to stress the ordinariness of the town and its life, but one easily passes the time away when one has a routine. To the very extent that our town encourages routine, one might say that all is for the best. Admittedly, seen like that, the life is not too exciting. At least disorder is unknown among us, and our people, open, likable, and eccentric, have always excelled in a far degree of respect from travelers. This town, which has nothing picturesque about it, no vegetation, and no soul, comes eventually to seem restful, in short, induced sleep. But it is only fair to add that the situation in the unraveled countryside, in the midst of bare plains surrounded by luminous hills at the edge of perfectly formed bay, one can only regret that it was built with the back turned to the bay, and that as a result it is impossible to see the sea. You always have to go and look for it. By now it will be easy to accept that nothing else could lead people of our town to accept the event that took place in the spring of the year in which, as we later understood, which were like the fortunates of the series of graves happening that the history intended to describe. To some people, these facts will seem quite natural. To others, on the contrary, improbable. But a chronicler cannot, after all, take account of such contradictions. His task is to merely say, "This happened," when he knows that indeed it happened, that it affected the lives of a whole society, and that there is consequently thousands of witnesses who will weigh up in their hearts the truth of what he's saying. Moreover, the narrator, whose identity will be revealed in due course, will not have to claim to authorities in the enterprise of the kind of chance that made it possible for him to gather the considerable numbers of testimonies in force. Circumstances had not involved him in everything that he describes. This is what entitles him to act as if a historian. Of course, a historian, even if he is an amateur, always has documents. A narrator of history has his documents, first of all, his own testimony, then that of others, since, by virtue of his role in this story, he comes to collect the confidence of all the characters in it, and finally he has written text which he happened to require. He intends to borrow from them what he sees fit and use them as he wishes. He intends, but perhaps it is time to have done the preliminaries and convince and turn to the story itself. The narrator of an early day must be given some detail. On the morning of April 16th, Dr. Bernard Rayoux emerges from his consulting room and came across a dead rat in the middle of the landing. At the time, he pushed the animal aside without paying much attention to it and went down the stairs. But once he was in the street, it occurred to him that the rat should not have been there, and he turned back to inform the concierge. The old M. Mitchell reaction made him still more aware of the incontroverty of his discovery. To him, the presence of a dead rat seemed merely odd, while for the concierge it was an outrage. In fact, the man was admitting there are no rats in the house. However, much to the doctor's assurance to him that there is one on the first floor landing, probably Mrs. Dead, M. Mitchell conviction was firm. There are no dead rats in the house, so this one must have been brought from outside. In short, it was a practical joke. That same evening, Bernard Rayoux was standing in the corner of the building looking for his keys before going into his flat. When he saw a large rat emerge hesitantly from the dark depths of the corridor in fur damp, the creature stopped, seemed to be trying to get its balance, stopped again, spun around and around with a faint cry, and eventually fell, blood spurting from its half-open lips. The doctor looked at it for a moment then went upstairs. He was not thinking about the rat. That spilled blood brought him back to the subject preoccupying him in his time, his wife, who had been ill for the past year and due to leave the next day for a sanatorium in the mountains. He found her lying on the bed in the room. As he asked her to do, she was gathering strength for the journey. She smiled. "I'm feeling fine," she said. The doctor looked at the face that had turned towards him in the light beside the lamp. To Rayoux, despite the 30 years that the marks of illness, this face was still the young woman, perhaps because of the smile that dispelled all the rest. "Sleep if you can," he said. "The nurse will come at 11 and I'll take you to the 12 o'clock train." He kissed her slightly moist forehead and smiled, following him to the door. The next day, April 17th, at 8 o'clock, the concierge stopped the doctor on the way past that accused some joke of having put 3 dead rats in the middle of the corridor. They must have been caught with large traps because they are covered in blood. The concierge stayed for some time on the doorstep, holding the rats in his paws and waiting for the culprit to give themselves away with a sarcastic remark. But he had been disappointed. "Oh, I'll get them in the end," said M. Mitchell. Rayoux was intrigued and decided to start his rounds on the outer districts, where the poorest of his patients lived. Here the rubbish was collected. Much later in the day, his car driving along the straight, dusty roads in this area brushed against boxes of rubbish laying in the edge of the pavement. In one street he drove down, in the way the door counted a dozen rats tipped out in the dirty rags and vegetable peelings. He found his first patient in bed, the room overlooking the street, which served both bedroom and dining room. The man was an old Spaniard with tough, heavy-lining face. In front of him, of a blanket, he had 2 saucepans full of chicken peas. When the doctor came in, the sick man, half-seated in bed, leant back in an attempt to get him breath. Gasping and slimy rasping in his old asthmatic, his wife brought a basin. "Well, doctor," he said, while Rayoux was injecting him, "they're coming out. Have you seen?" "Yes," said the wife. "Our neighbors picked up 3 of them." The old man rubbed his hands. "They're coming out. You can see them in all the dustbins. It's the hunger." Rayoux was soon to find the whole district was talking about the rats. when he had finished his visit and went home. "There's a telegram for you upstairs," said M. Mitchell. The doctor asked if he had seen any more rats. "Oh no," said the concierge. "You see, I'm keeping a lookout. The pigs don't dare." The telegram was to tell Rayu that his mother was arriving the next day. She would be looking after her son while his sick wife was away. When the doctor came in, the nurse was still there and found his wife in bed, wearing a suit and with makeup disguising her pallor. He smiled. "Good," he said, "very good." And short while later at the station, he was sitting her into the sleeping car. She looked around the compartment. "Isn't this too expensive for us?" "A necessary expense," Rayu said.